Hi, and welcome to Power Play. I'm Michael Couture here in Ottawa. Tonight, Pierre Poilievre sits down with CTV.
Do you have a magic number?
No, I don't believe in magic. Has capitulated.
The Conservative leader had a wide-ranging discussion with our chief political correspondent, Vassy Kapelos. She's standing by to talk about that exclusive with Pierre Poilievre. Then, getting ready to reopen the North American trade deal.
Our agreement today will expand and deepen that partnership so that the next 30 years hold even greater promise than the last 30 years have delivered.
Prime Minister Mark Carney was in Mexico signing a deal to deepen trade ties and partnerships with that continental neighbor. How could this help the trilateral trade review? We have two experts standing by. Plus, the race to lead Canada's NDP.
My name is Avi Lewis, and that's why I'm running, to be leader of the federal NDP.
Activist and filmmaker Avi Lewis has thrown his hat in the ring. So how could or how would he rebuild a party that was decimated in last spring's election? He'll join us just a little later on in the show. First, though, in an interview for this Sunday's question period, CTV News chief political correspondent Vassy Kapelos, I'm not nervous because she's sitting beside me, sat down with Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre for a wide-ranging one-on-one discussion. There she is, everybody, on the Canadian economy and his leadership. She joins me right now. Thank you for doing this, Vassy.
I don't need a title. It's all good.
Yeah, I know. It doesn't
matter.
Chief political correspondent. How many times have you screwed up mine on the radio?
A million times. Yeah.
Okay, talk to me about this 20-minute interview. What was your main takeaway from it?
25 minutes. The whole thing will air on question period this Sunday. Look, I have a lot of takeaways from it, but I thought that I would sort of jump on what you're going to talk about with your guests, the nature of trade with the United States right now and how it has shifted things. I think really what we saw over the summer was the possibility of some sort of trade agreement with the United States that went and, came and went. Yeah. And now CUSMA is restarting. And essentially the focus for the federal government is on lowering, very punishing sectoral tariffs, steel, aluminum, forestry, et cetera, autos, right? And what we have seen through other deals that other countries have made is that they have essentially made those deals and agreed to a baseline tariff, anywhere from 10 to 19%, depending on the country. So my question to Mr. Poilievre, who has been very critical of the Carney government and their approach to these trade negotiations, is would you, if you were, for example, Prime Minister, settle for a deal in which tariffs remain on sectors? And have a listen to what he said. One more question, if you'll permit me, on another vote that you're going to face, and that's the leadership review in January. Do you have a magic number?
No, I don't believe in magic.
Do you have a number at which you think you need in order to remain as leader?
I don't, no.
Why not?
I'll be working to win over the people of the Conservative Party who will be there, and our message will be that I'm the leader that will bring forward the Canada, that will restore the promise of the country.
Okay, so that obviously was the question that you had for him on his leadership, and that, of course, leadership review is coming up in January. And I'll see with the control room if we do have that other clip about Pierre Poilievre and talking about the deal with the United States. See if we have it now.
I would seek a tariff-free deal. I mean, we used to have that privileged access to the American economy, and in exchange for that, we could provide more continental security that would make both our countries more secure and stable. That's the deal that I would go for.
Okay, so two things there. He's saying don't settle for any tariffs. Again, it's definitely one thing to say something in opposition. It's another when you do see all these other countries have agreed to a certain level of base tariff. It will be interesting to see, though, as those discussions evolve with the United States, because remember, we don't have an interim agreement. We just have CUSMA covering about 95% of our trade. It will be interesting to see where the government ends up, basically. Like, at what point are you going to actually settle for a level of tariffs, or are you going to fight for zero? So that was Mr. Poilievre's view. The other clip that you heard was, of course, I think, the political side of things, less policy-oriented. We're all very interested in Mr. Poilievre's leadership review in January. We just saw Bonnie Crombie in Ontario get 57%, and that be, a number that she had to step aside for, resign for. So I wanted to know, does he have a number in mind? Does he have a magic number in mind at which point he decides this isn't enough support for me to stick around? He would not put a number on it. It's common for leaders facing leadership reviews,
Right.
but as you heard my follow-up there, it is interesting to pose the question, what should we as Canadians or people in the Conservative Party, for example, take from that? If you're not willing to say, you know, at what point I stay or go, what does that mean about your own confidence levels ahead of that leadership vote? He, of course, dismissed any concerns about a lack thereof of confidence, but I think the exchange is worth putting out there.
I'm wondering what you're hearing from Conservatives on where their mind is at for a number, because obviously Conservatives are sitting out there, and a number of them are being very public about their support for Pierre Poilievre, but do they have a number in mind in terms of wanting him to stay as a result of him hitting a certain level?
It's usually not necessarily like, I got to see 67%, but, you know, Bonnie Crombie is a good example. If you're falling anywhere in the 50s, I would argue in this case, especially 60s, maybe even 70s. Like, it is context dependent. I think I remember Joe Clark in 1983, I can't remember the exact year, got 66%, still stepped aside. Like, it's against the backdrop of what the expectations are. And ultimately, when you've just lost an election where the polls a few months before that election had you poised to win, and you lost your own seat, yes, you've come back from that, the polls are narrowing, but still, that is part of the context that will inform the view Conservatives take. And ultimately, like, at the end of the day, you'll have to reach some sort of level that offsets some of those concerns. And that's going to be, you know, dependent on what happens. But definitely, if you're looking at the 50s or even 60s, I think, you know.
Yeah, that's a time.
I'm not saying that's going to happen. I'm just saying that,
No, but a number that he may want to actually think about. Okay, thank you very much. CTV's chief political correspondent, Vashti Kapelos. You can watch her full interview with Pierre Poilievre on Sunday on Question Period. It's going to air right across the network at 11 a.m. Eastern Time on CTV News Channel as well, plus ctvnews.ca. Turning south now, the Prime Minister and his Mexican trade mission. U.S.-Canada Trade Minister Dominic LeBlanc announced in Mexico City that the government is following the United States and officially launching public consultations ahead of next year's planned review of NAFTA 2.0, the deal that you also know as CUSMA.
The fact that the Americans have formally begun their process, which involves obviously Congress, it's under American law that they have to begin their domestic consultation in preparation of the review, which is built into the agreement in 2026, for us is a positive sign. They didn't do a more dramatic gesture. They're beginning their own domestic process as we are today. So all of that for us is encouraging.
So that announcement as Carney signed a pact to deepen economic ties with Mexico ahead of the review of that trilateral trade agreement. So what's the significance of what the Canadian side was able to accomplish in their 36 hours there? Well, we have some people who can answer that question. Joining me now are former Mexican ambassador to the United States, Arturo Sarucan, and Carlo Dade. He's the Director of International Policy in the School of Public Policy at the University of Calgary. Thank you both for being on Power Play.
Pleasure.
Ambassador, I want to start with you on this one. On the surface, it could look like this is an agreement just to have more talks. But what is behind the agreement for these two countries and what they signed in the last 36 hours?
Well, what they actually signed is still, I think, pretty unclear. I think the next coming days we'll get more information. The strategic partnership obviously involves issues related to trade and infrastructure and deepening the trade relationship between Mexico and Canada. But I think at the end of the day, as they say, half of the game is showing up. And the fact that this is the first time in 8 years that a Canadian Prime Minister has gone to Mexico outside of the North American Leader Summits is a very important piece of the game. The fact that President Sheinbaum accepted Prime Minister Carney's invitation to join him at the G7 summit in Kananaskis was also important because Mexico and Canada had been in a pissing match, particularly since the fall when some Canadian premiers suggested that Canada should throw Mexico under the bus when it came to dealing with then President-elect Trump. Now the great challenge, obviously, is that we both face first a problem of tariffs and tariff negotiations with the United States, and in tandem, the formal start of the review process, the statutory mandatory review process of CUSMA, which is allegedly supposed to start in July, but which will most likely, in terms of what we're hearing in Washington, will probably start in January this year. So aligning interests, aligning an agenda. I think they both were careful in making sure that no one in the White House thought that Canada and Mexico were ganging up on them, which is a sensitive issue both in Ottawa and Mexico City. But I think that the message here is that we may finally be getting a bit of muscle tone in the Canada-Mexico bilateral relationship, which is long overdue.
Mr. Dade, I wanted to pick up a little bit on what the ambassador mentioned there in terms of what we saw in the fall. How much does this help smooth things over? After it wasn't just Ontario Premier Doug Ford who had talked about going it alone in terms of a deal with the U.S. and Canada and kind of excluding Mexico, but Prime Minister Justin Trudeau had mentioned it as well. They kind of floated that idea. How much of this was really about trying to smooth things over and then having this fertile ground now to maybe go forward together?
It certainly played a major role with the Prime Minister's trip, but also with Premier Danielle Smith's trip to Mexico. Look, this is a periodic, an unfortunate but periodic occurrence in the Canada-Mexico relationship. We go through phases of benign neglect. The leaders aren't paying attention, the elected officials aren't, but there is, to be clear, work being done at the ground. We meet with Mexico every year in an intensive set of working groups at the business level, agricultural level, civil society level, academic level. So there is much to build upon and reactivate, which this meeting did. But in terms of the throwing Mexico under the bus, yes, going down and making not amends, but clarifying that the relationship is important, that there were unfortunate comments from elected officials who aren't familiar with the depth of the relationship needed to be done. And Danielle Smith's trip in this regard, I think, was equally important. It shows that it's not just Ottawa that is back on track with Mexico, but it's also the provinces, or at least there's only one province now that may still be problematic, Ontario, but the folks in Alberta, Danielle Smith has made it clear that for everyone else, sorry, we forgot, but we're back on track. We're back on Team Canada, Mexico, Team North America, as the two heads of state put it at the press conference.
Yeah, Ambassador, how important is it to maintain that type of viewpoint and that type of image, that it is not these two countries that are on either side of the United States that are trying to gang up against them, and that they are not trying to hammer out some sort of a side deal without the United States? Because we know that the United States is watching this type of stuff. You have to only look at the U.S. ambassador to Canada, Pete Hoekstra, who has in the last couple of days talked about how disappointed he is to hear some of the elbows up talk and you know, some of the boycotting of American products here in Canada. How important is it outwardly to make sure that everybody understands in the United States that this was not that, you know, Canada and Mexico trying to broker some sort of side deal?
Well, first of all, when the US treats its partners like adversaries, its partners need to start acting like allies. And I think this is a bit of what's going on behind the scenes. I think it is important that Mexico and Canada align negotiation postures. In the past, Canada has sort of complained about the trilateralization of its relationship in North America with Mexico in the mix. But I think that obviously, with a potential scenario in Washington, that at the end of the day, President Trump's intention may be actually to get rid of a regional North American free trade agreement and end up with two respective bilateral free trade agreements, one between the United States and Canada, another one between the United States and Mexico. This is a very important conversation because we need to be aligned. We need to be in sync. And there's also an important discussion, which I hope both the Prime Minister and the President had in Mexico City, which, if this scenario that I've just laid out for you does play out, do then Canada and Mexico seek to pursue a bilateral free trade agreement because of the evisceration of a North American free trade agreement? So all of this is important. I think some of the leg room that has gone into preparing the trip, the Prime Minister's trip to Mexico now, and the hard work that's going to start as soon as the consultation processes kick off in the three countries. Mexico has also started its internal consultation process in sync with what Canada and the United States have just done. So it's going to be a delicate dance to send the message to the White House that we're not ganging up and pretending to stab Washington in the back, but that we will work together to defend our interests, and more importantly, to defend what has been a very important success story, which is the North American trade edifice, and to send an important message to Washington, which is if Washington wants its most important foreign policy recalibration since the end of the Cold War, which is its relationship with China, to be successful, it needs Canada and Mexico in the trade and economic space to ensure that that recalibration succeeds.
Mr. Tate, I've only got about 30 seconds left because we're running out of time, but do you think that this was a good option now and a good meeting to potentially set up a backstop in the event that, as the ambassador said, that there could be the collapse of this trilateral agreement because the U.S. may want that?
Yes, absolutely. We have a twist on what the ambassador said. We have another agreement with Mexico, the Trans-Pacific Agreement, where the U.S. isn't present. So maybe this sparks our thinking about how to work together. We already work together and produce things together to sell in the U.S. We can take that joint production and we could move it to Asia, but we just simply ignored the opportunity. On the larger point of ganging up on the U.S., look, Canada thought it could do better going off on its own last time we sat down with Trump. What that attempt to go alone with the U.S. got us was an announcement on a Monday in August that Trump said he had a deal with Mexico and would see if Canada could join. What wasn't as widely reported was we weren't taken by surprise. We were fully prepared because Mexico had been keeping us abreast of what they were doing with the U.S. People the ambassador and I both know were involved in making sure we weren't taken by surprise. Mexico pulled our butts out of the fire last time. The same thing with steel and aluminum tariffs. It was Mexico that brought a solution to us. So I think the current leadership in Canada is relearning what the public doesn't know, which is we have benefited from cooperation with Mexico. We don't talk about it, and the public doesn't know because were we to talk about it, the U.S. would get upset. So we don't talk about it. We benefit from this. We don't talk about it. But because we don't talk about it, the public doesn't know. So it feeds a vicious feedback loop where you then see premiers running off and saying unfortunate things.
Okay. Well, unfortunately, we're going to have to leave it there. Carlo Dade and Ambassador Arturo Sorocan, thank you so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
We're going to discuss this a little bit more a little later on in the show with our front bench. Today, we have Sabrina Grover, Melanie Paradis, and Carl Belanger. Still ahead, the race is on. Avi Lewis on how he'd rebuild the NDP if he wins party leadership. Stay right there. Power Play. We'll be right back.
Well, nothing's off the table at the moment. Certainly, I've had a lot of pressure from across Canada, and I'm still making that decision, but nothing's off the table. I think the party needs to connect with members. I think the party needs to bring it back to members. And it's really up to them to decide. They're the ones that are going to be voting for a leader. And I think we need to really listen to members, and that will give us the direction on where we need to go.
Well, that was Leah Gazan, one of just 7 NDP MPs, and she was commenting on her party's leadership race earlier this week. Now, the NDP is set to elect a new leader in March, and that winner will have a pretty big task. The party was decimated in the last federal election, losing official party status in the House of Commons. Now, MP Heather McPherson and Union President Rob Ashton are both listed on the Elections Canada website as candidates, but they've yet to publicly declare their candidacies. The first to do so is NDP leadership candidate Avi Lewis, and he joins me right now. Mr. Lewis, welcome to Power Play. Thanks so much for joining us.
Hi, Mike. Great to be with you.
Thank you.
Before the last election, the NDP had 24 MPs. It now has 7. I think a lot of people might be wondering why you want this job.
Oh my God, what a question. To be able to lead a party out of the wilderness. Last election was an anomaly. Everybody knows it. There were unique circumstances. The structural need for an alternative in Canadian politics has never gone away. And we're seeing it like never before today. We have a functioning conservative liberal coalition at the moment in all of the big things that Prime Minister Carney is doing to respond to the economic threat from the United States and a looming recession. He has the support of Poilievre. And so the field is wide open for anyone to critique it and to offer alternatives. And as you can imagine, I think they're doing all the wrong things. And the NDP is needed now like never before. No matter how few seats we have in the House of Commons, we have a huge space to fill in the Canadian political conversation. And all Canadians are better off when they were actually offering credible progressive alternatives to a toxic status quo that's taken us in the wrong direction.
I want to talk to you about that space that you intend to fill, because in a video that you posted online just after the last election, you said, quote, "There's a legitimate rage in the way that the NDP has been run over the last couple of decades." And you added that there is a need for transformation of the party. What kind of transformation are you looking at?
Well, I think the base of our party is frustrated and wants a more voice in the say. The local riding associations want more resources and power. We need to re-democratize some of our own internal practices. And that's like NDP business. We're going to do that in the course of the leadership race. What's really critical right now is that we have a government that's talking about spending up to $150 billion a year on weapons and war. Going into recession, they're slashing government spending by 15%. And they're pursuing these major projects that are like wartime level spirit of exporting more raw resources, mostly to the United States. And none of that is going to help lower my rent or help me when I've got $300 worth of groceries in my cart at checkout, and I haven't even got 3 meals planned for the week. That is the emergency facing Canadians. And if we want to go to war and tool up and militarize our society, we need to be declaring war on the actual emergency that's facing us all, which is the cost of living crisis, which is absolutely the responsibility of the tiny number of corporations that dominate every sector of our economy. 3 big grocery chains, 3 telephone companies, 5 big oil companies, and the big banks that fund them. I mean, they are profit gouging and price fixing, and people are suffering in their daily lives. So we have serious problems that we need to get to work on, and the NDP is ready to leap back into the fray with solutions that are actually as big as the crises we face.
I take your point on that, but the things that you're saying right now are the same types of things we heard from Jagmeet Singh, and that did not get him any further ahead. In fact, it got him only 7 seats. So why do you think that similar message coming out of your mouth will be different?
I don't think it's a similar message, to be honest. I mean, obviously, we share something as New Democrats on this side of the spectrum.
Well, he was talking about grocery prices during the last election. That didn't seem to resonate with Canadians, or if it did, that's not maybe what motivated their votes in the last election. So you're talking about all of those bread and butter issues that he was talking about during that campaign, as I had followed. So in a sense, I guess I'm asking, what do you have that's on offer that's different, that even New Democrats will say, we'll go with that?
I think that's for the members to judge, honestly, Mike. I don't know, maybe I'm not cut out for the self-promoting part of this gig. I think I might say things a little differently than Jagmeet did. And I think that of course, there's going to be continuity. The point is that we're in a completely different situation. Canadians voted for someone who would stand up to Trump, and they're seeing Carney lead with Poilievre's support massive changes in Canada that are ignoring their daily emergency. And if we have to hammer away on the fact that this system is rigged for the rich, and that the 99% of Canadians are actually struggling to get by, and we have solutions to do something about that, we're going to propose bigger and bolder solutions. And let me just say something quite clearly that we didn't hear previously from the NDP. We need a public option when the market fails to deliver housing at a reasonable price, food at a reasonable price, transit that actually works, and you don't have to go through the Hunger Games getting to work. That's market failure, and we need a public option for food and groceries. We should have a public internet option. I mean, why is my cell phone bill more than $100 a month for internet and data? That's just lunacy. I mean, around the world, people, I live in Vancouver, which is a big tourist city. Tourists come from all over the world and they are shocked at the prices that we pay in Canada because we're being extracted from by these small clubs of huge corporations. And we're going to keep tilting away at that, Mike. And if you can say it sounds like the same old, it's a message that Canadians are ready for, I'm convinced. And it's what we hear when we talk to our neighbors. Life is impossible. The government has to step in and actually fix stuff. And if that means a public option, like $50 a month, all in cell phone plans and internet, you'll see how fast Bell and TELUS and Rogers actually provide an affordable service for Canadians when there's actually a public option to keep them honest. I'm ready to roll this out and talk about it in more detail over the next 6 months, but this is where we need to go.
And I hear you on that. And yes, there'll be tons of time to talk about it leading up to the leadership campaign. But what you're proposing here, it would seem, if the government is getting into that type of business, would that not add to the fiscal responsibility of the government and further inflate the debt?
Well, if we don't spend $150 billion on arms every year just to placate an authoritarian to the south, we've got immense resources at our disposal. Mark Carney came in and just out of the blue summoned $9 billion for military spending between June and April, and then declared that the cupboard was bare and we have to cut 15% of all public spending. I mean, there are immense resources in this country. They need to be put at the service of actually meeting the needs of Canadians and not doing the same thing over and over again and hoping for a different result. My grandfather, David Lewis, who led the party in the early 70s, famous for the corporate welfare bums campaign of 1972, which, I mean, imagine what David Lewis would think when he looked at the profitable corporations in Canada today and the suffering of the majority of people. He said, big business and the government both hold hands in your pocket. And that's what we're facing today. And we actually need a party that is prepared to say that to Canada and is prepared to back it up by reversing that relationship and making the government an instrument of the people, not of corporate Canada.
I'm running out of time, and I think there will be other opportunities, hopefully, that you'll come back on. We can talk a little bit more about the in-depth of your plan. I wanted to ask you this, though. When you consider, as you had said, you're trying to lead this party out of the wilderness, and of course, the rank and file are looking to someone that can do that. Your record is such that you've run in the last 2 elections and you've come in third both times. Why are you that person? Why should they put their faith in you to be able to lead this party forward?
Mike, that would have been a spectacular gotcha question for Jack Layton.
It's not a gotcha question. It's your record. It's your record running in ridings. I'm just trying to ask you, if you were unable to get elected in a riding, why do you think you're the best person to lead this party?
And I'm saying to you, if Jack Layton was sitting here today, you could have asked him the same question, because when Jack ran for leader, he did not have a seat, and he had lost twice in federal elections. So yes, this is my record. I'm obviously, I bring it with me. It's a matter of public record. I ran where I lived in both ridings that I ran before, and I ran in places that the NDP had never won. And I ran on a point of principle in communities that I was enmeshed in, that I was connected to, that I wanted to fight for. I believe that's important at the local level in politics. And now I'm presenting myself for a different job. And I think people will evaluate me on the basis of what I have to say, and not the fact that I lost in the last election, where a lot of great NDP MPs lost their seats who had held them for a long time.
Okay, we're going to have to leave it there. Avi Lewis is hoping to be the next leader of the NDP, and we hope to have you back. We appreciate you being on.
Pleasure, Mike. Maybe next time with your the former host, Evan Solomon, we could debate about his AI propaganda in government. I'd love that.
We will possibly look at that as an option. Appreciate you being there.
Yeah, thank you.
Coming up, the government tables its first piece of legislation of the fall sitting, and it was legislation involving new criminal offenses on hate crimes. After the break, we're going to bring in our front bench to discuss that and Carney's Mexican trip. Sabrina Grover, Melanie Paradis, and Carl Blanchet, they're all standing by, and they'll be right back after this.
Our agreement today will expand and deepen that partnership so that the next 30 years hold even greater promise than the last 30 years have delivered. We are both undertaking massive transformations of our economy. Plan Mexico, Canada strong. Our efforts will be strengthened by working together.
That was Prime Minister Mark Carney yesterday in Mexico City. Now, he's already on his way back after a busy 36 hours where Canada and Mexico announced a deal to deepen trade ties. Now, hanging over that trip is the ongoing negotiation with the U.S. to remove tariffs on Canadian goods. Now, as you heard earlier, the minister responsible for trade with the U.S., Dominic LeBlanc, also told reporters that Canada is starting the consultation process to review the trilateral trade agreement known as CUSMA. So, is Canada shoring up support with Mexico just in case the North American pact falls apart? Or is Carney trying to create a united front as both countries sit down with the U.S. to renegotiate that continental trade agreement? Let's ask the front bench. Sabrina Grover was a federal Liberal candidate in the 2021 election. She's a senior advisor at North Star Public Affairs. Melanie Paradis is a former communications director to Aaron O'Toole. She's now the president of Texture Communications. And former interim NDP national director Carl Belanger is here. He's now the president of Traction Strategies. Thank you all. Welcome to Friday, everyone. Sabrina, today's news feels like they had a meeting to agree to have another meeting. Do you think it was enough?
I don't think just the one meeting was enough, no, but I think it is certainly a step in the right direction to realign relationships and a strategic alliance with Mexico that we have really put to the sidelines for the duration of NAFTA and really the first part of CUSMA. I think that we have so over-relied on our relationship with the United States and just assumed that it would always be there, that Mexico hasn't been important. But with Claudia Sheinbaum in particular, making so many progressive internal reforms in Mexico, I think Mexico looks like a really, really optimal trading partner right now. Specifically, when you look at industries that are hurting in Canada, like agriculture, like canola, like some of those biofuel, renewable sources, that's a great opportunity for us to double down on our relationship with Mexico. I don't think Mexico is going to be the only partner that we, create new relationships with. Obviously, we've got Europe on the docket as well, but I certainly think in advance of 2026, this is an important strategic move.
Melanie, how do you think this plays when the Prime Minister gets back to Canada and goes in the House? Do you think that Parliament will look at this and say, okay, great job?
I'm sure it won't be as simple as that, unfortunately, for him. Now, I think that going into the negotiations with the United States, one of the things that was also announced is the opening up of consultations with businesses around the CUSMA negotiations. And this is a really important moment for businesses across the country in a variety of different sectors to make their both opportunities for leverage as well as their vulnerabilities, their risk exposure on trade known to the government, so that when they go to the table with the Americans, they're better equipped to have negotiating powers and to most importantly have leverage. One of the challenges that we have though with leverage is we've for the past 15 years we've not been able to get our products to market, whether that's oil and gas or minerals. We need to be able to show the Americans that we can actually do that. And that's why getting some wins on major projects right now is going to be really important before these negotiations start next year.
Carl, do you think that this is Canada trying to make sure that they have a backstop to the potential falling apart, if that happens, of the trilateral trade agreement?
Well, maybe, but we won't replace the United States market with Mexico. It's not going to happen. It doesn't work like that. But it was long overdue. That's for sure. I, for one, was really puzzled when politicians in Canada, namely Premier Doug Ford, was saying we need to throw Mexico under the bus. We don't need them. Donald Trump played that game. Pitting Canada against Mexico in the first round of CUSMA negotiations. So it is smart to get closer to Mexico, to have some kind of united front. And from a trade perspective, Mexico is also the gateway to the rest of South America, Latin America. It's a growing market there. There's a lot of potential, and we need to diversify. So we don't need to restrict ourselves to just Europe. Mexico is a great partner. We need to get closer to them. And I think that's a great step the Prime Minister did today.
It's interesting because in our previous discussion on this earlier in the show, we had the former Mexican ambassador to the U.S. talk about making sure that outwardly, it didn't look like we're ganging up on the U.S. because they're watching this. And you know what? I can't help, Sabrina, but think of how U.S. Ambassador to Canada, Pete Hoekstra, was in Halifax this week and saying that he was disappointed to hear the talk of elbows up or that we're in a trade war. So I'm wondering what you think about how the Carney government is trying to frame all of this and, almost downplaying it so that it doesn't get traction in the U.S.
Yeah, I think the communications exercise around this trading relationship with the United States is just as important as what actually comes out of anything. And I think what's important about that is, when you look at the U.S. context, the goalposts are still going to shift between now and when we arrive at a actual negotiation in 2026. And a lot of that has to do with the internal arrangement of what's going to happen in the United States, right? I think that Donald Trump doesn't just look outwardly to the world and say, well, where can I, mingle or make waves today? I think he's also looking internally at the domestic situation in the United States, and he's going to say, okay, what does the midterms look like? Which states do I need to win? Mm-hmm. Where does that win come from? How can I make sure that when I think about external trading relationships with Canada, that I can guarantee myself a win? So it's so evolving in terms of how we're going to manage the United States relationship. And I think for Mark Carney, the best thing that we can do is bolster and strengthen Canada's resolve either internally, domestically, and with these partners, because you just never know what's coming down the pipeline with the U.S.
Melanie, what do you think?
Look, I think that diversifying our trade is always a good idea. Building relationships with Europe, with Mexico, with other friendly governments is a really important thing for Canada to do. Obviously, Mark Carney campaigned on getting a good deal with the Americans, and he hasn't shown any progress towards that yet. And that's going to be really important going into the next parliamentary session.
Carl, you get the last 30 on this.
Yeah, Sandra raised a good point about the goalpost shifting, and they'll shift again and again and again and again. It's like we're playing Quidditch, so maybe we should stop playing that game and do what's important for Canada.
Wow. He's saying, okay, first of all, I don't think Sabrina mentioned Harry Potter, but fine.
No,
okay.
She mentioned goalposts.
Yeah, she mentioned goalposts. I mean, do people know what Quidditch is?
Well,
am I saying it properly?
Quidditch.
Quidditch. And I'm sure we will get viewer feedback on this one. Carl, thank you for doing that.
You're welcome.
We're going to take a quick break. Our panel will be right back. I don't know what other movies we're going to mention, but we're going to talk about the new legislation that was tabled today by the federal government to combat hate crimes. What's behind the new focus on law and order? The front bench is going to tackle that right after this.
When I began to dig into the issue, I realized through my conversations and study that there are other opportunities to combat hate more broadly in this country. And given the opportunity to address hate, I don't want to miss it.
That was Justice Minister Sean Fraser today talking about legislation that the Liberal government has tabled, which would amend the criminal code to target hate crimes. Now, here are the new offenses that would be created. It would make it a crime to make someone afraid of accessing religious or cultural institution. There would also be a crime to obstruct or interfere with access to a similar institution. The legislation would also make hate-motivated crime a specific offense. Lastly, it would be a crime to willfully promote hatred against an identifiable group by displaying hate symbols in public. Now, this is the first of 3 justice reforms the Liberal government has signaled that it will be tabling. Fraser says bail reform is coming next month, and it also comes a day after Conservative Frank Caputo tabled a private member's bill which would make murder of an intimate partner first-degree murder. So what does this say about the Carney government and where they are going in this fall session? Let's ask the front bench. We've got Sabrina Grover, Melanie Paradis, and Carl Belanger. Now, Melanie, Pierre Poilievre has been talking about being tough on crime for months now. So what does it say to you that the Liberals are moving on it now?
Well, it definitely says that they want to stop Pierre Poilievre's moves on the board. They want to take these chips off, the chess piece off the board from Pierre Poilievre, because he's very effective when it comes to crime. And this is an issue set that he certainly is strong on. But folks who've watched the show for a long time will know that I'm deeply cynical. And while I think that this move on hate crime is incredibly necessary, we've seen a huge rise in Islamophobia and certainly anti-Semitism, tremendous rise in that. So we definitely need to make a move on this, but the timing is a bit suspicious to me. And I'm forced to remember that last year, the Liberals lost in their by-election Toronto-St. Paul, which is a riding with a very large Jewish population because of this issue. And they're coming up to a by-election that they're going to have to call in University of Rosedale, which is the next riding over for Chrystia Freeland. And so I have to think that that was one of the motivators in putting this forward right now.
Declaring your cynicism before giving your opinion is always appreciated. Mel, I think you were a ray of sunshine on this panel, so don't sell yourself short there. Sabrina, the Liberals did signal that they were doing this summer. Does that give them some cover that they aren't just trying to copy another party's notes here?
Yeah, I think it was a smart move to introduce this legislation, though I think the rollout of it is going to be interesting. And so if you listen to the press conference with Fraser, there's still a lot of questions about how it's actually going to be implemented, and I think that's what's going to be most important. I also think that while legislation is important, and it's very key for law enforcement to be able to have some of these measures and have some of these tools in their tool belt in order to be able to enforce hate crime legislation or protect citizens who are experiencing hate crime. The thing that's most important that's driving this is the polarization of politics, right? Like, the more that we have polarized rhetoric, the more that we have these really divided approaches to things that are happening in our borders, but also things that are happening around the world. That's what drives this. And so I don't know how we're actually going to reduce hate crime in that sense, because that's why people are being targeted. And so I think the legislation is important, but I think that there's a broader context that needs to be considered here.
Carl, what do you think of Sabrina's point that getting to the root cause maybe is not what this is going to address, or even how legislation could possibly prevent?
Yeah, I mean, is it a legal problem or an enforcement problem? I mean, there are lots of hate crimes being committed right now in this country. They're not prosecuted, they're not investigated. There's not enough resources to go through all of them, targeting the Jewish community, the Muslim community, the LGBTQ communities, others across the country. So it feels like they're tinkering. It's like, we're going to change the legislation, we're going to tinker, but what is it going to do actually to stop hate crime? If we don't put resources to deal with it, it's not going to amount to much, and it's not going to change anything.
Yeah, it's an interesting point, Melanie, but I also can't help but think, and again, this is not my cynicism, but just trying to look at, what things are showing us out there, and polls clearly indicating that the trade war isn't really top of mind anymore. So do you think that this is partly that as well, realizing that, yes, we have a problem, but at the same time, this government is maybe looking at the issue set in front of them and saying, maybe we need to move somewhere else as we work on different topics, but at the same time, crime is something that a lot of Canadians care about now.
Absolutely. Crime is huge amongst Canadians, especially Canadian women right now. There are people who are very concerned about home invasions, about violent crime, the perceived rise of crime across the country, and people not feeling safe in their own houses or having the ability to protect themselves. Mark Carney has made comments about bail reform. There seems to be a promise lingering out there that there's going to be legislation related to bail reform introduced this fall. I think that they may be holding off on bail reform until they figure out the budgeting side of it, because one of the realities that no one seems to be talking about right now with bail reform is it's going to necessitate that we build more prisons. We currently have an overflowing number of people. Part of the reason why there's a revolving door is there's no space in our prisons. And so we're going to need to build more, and that's not a very sexy thing to put in the budget. But with bail reform is going to come the necessity to make that kind of a big strategic investment, and at the provincial level as well, because these aren't just federal crimes.
Yeah, Sabrina, talk about that sort of balancing act and knowing that the budget is coming November 4th.
Yeah, I want to pick up on that last point that Mel just made, and it ties to what Carl said when it comes to the enforcement piece. Provinces are not investing enough in crime, and when the perception of crime is going up, crime itself has typically either stayed neutral or gone down in the last 2 years based on some of the statistics that have been released. But provinces are not investing the adequate resources into the policing court system to make sure that they can target this issue at their levels, right? So you look at Alberta. Alberta had a legal aid crisis this year. Alberta has a number of other provincial crises when it comes to enforcement and crime. And so we can't just look to the federal government to change policy and say, well, that's going to solve the problem if provinces refuse to meet the issue with dollars. And I think that that has to be something that the Carney government encourages provinces to do, because otherwise you're going to have a gap between what the policy is and where the funding is.
Got about 20 seconds, Carl.
Yeah, I mean, provincial governments have choices to make. Are they going to build 10 new schools, 1 hospital, or 2 prisons? I mean, that's the reality of the budgetary choices they're facing, and you know where they're going.
Yeah, the math just is going to have to math. Okay, Sabrina Grover, Melanie Paradis, Carl Belanger, thank you all for being here. Stick around, though. We'll be right back with our takeaway. And for today's takeaway, we're going to go back to CTV's interview with Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre. In it, Chief Political Correspondent Vassy Kapelos asked if he has a magic number when it comes to support at his upcoming leadership review vote in January. Have a listen.
One more question, if you
Yes,
permit me,
please.
on another vote that you're going to face, and that's the leadership review in January. Do you have a
Right.
magic number?
No, I don't believe in magic.
Do you have a number at which you think you need in order to remain as leader?
I don't know.
Why not?
I'll be working to win over the people of the Conservative Party who will be there, and our message will be that I'm the leader that will bring forward the Canada that will restore the promise of the country.
And a reminder, you can watch the full interview with Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre on Sunday's edition of CTV's Question Period with Vassy Kapelos. It airs right across our network at 11 a.m. Eastern, also on CTV News Channel and ctvnews.ca. Well, that is your Power Play Week in Politics. I'm Mike Lecouteur. We appreciate you sharing your time with us. Have yourselves a great weekend, but stay tuned to CTV News Channel because your top headlines are just ahead.